Hey, what's going on, guys? So today we're going to be doing questions 26 and 27, and this is from the SAT number 17. And first thing we should notice is that this is a paired question here, which means that the best way to solve this is to start the question from 26 and then use the answer choices from 27 to use, basically find an answer choice from 27 and then use that to come back and answer 26. So 26 asks, it can most reasonably be inferred from the passage that the nutrient requirements of many plants have the consequence of something. So this tells us that we need to look for a text in 27 that tells us something about the nutrient requirements of many plants. That's what we need. The next thing is this right here, reasonably be inferred. So I usually don't put too much emphasis on when we talk about inference or talk about implication, because I find that honestly it doesn't really change the structure of the question too much. What it does tell us is that it gives us a little bit of a signal that the information we're looking for may be like one level below the surface. So we're still not going to make any assumptions or any connections that are not in the text, but things might be a little non-obvious, so we want to be prepared and ready for that. So let's look through the answer choices now for 27, and we're going to look for something about the nutrient requirements of many plants. So let's start with 16 through 21. That's right here. This says Matthew Klooster from Harvard University and colleagues empirically investigated whether the dried bracts, specialized leaves, on a rare woodland plant, Monotropsis odorata, might serve a similar purpose as the stripes on a tiger or the gray coloration of the wings of the peppered moth, namely to hide. So this right here is just basically explaining sort of the question that spurred the research for Matthew Klooster. It's sort of introducing his project overall. What it doesn't do is tell us anything really about the nutrient requirements of many plants. There's really nothing mentioned about that in here. So I think we can feel pretty confident in eliminating answer choice A. Then we have B, which is lines 22 through 25. That's right down here. And 1, 2, that says Monotropsis odorata is a fascinating plant species as it relies exclusively upon, I'm not going to try to say this, what is it, mycorrhizal fungus that associates with its roots for all the resources that it needs to live. So this is interesting right here. I think we're getting into better territory because here we're talking about a nutrient, right? It relies exclusively upon this fungus that it associates with its roots for all of the resources that it needs to live. So this is telling us specifically about this plant that's in study, and it does tell us something about the its nutrient requirements. However, it doesn't tell us too directly about the nutrient requirements of many plants, of other plants, but I still think it's useful. Let's look at it. Let's keep it for a moment. Then we have 25 through 30, which happens to come right after this line. And that says, because this plant no longer requires photosynthetic pigmentation, i.e. green coloration, to produce its own energy, it is free to adopt a broader range of possibilities in coloration, much like fungi or animals. So both of these here are talking about nutrient requirements. And we know that we're talking with an inference question, so it might be a little bit subtle, but I think these are both good because they are both talking about, like I said, the nutrient requirements. Let's just keep them both for a moment. Then we have D, which is lines 31 through 34. That says, using a large population of, etc., Klooster and his colleagues experimentally removed the dried bracts, etc. So this is sort of getting into the methodology of the study that Klooster performed, but doesn't tell us anything about the nutrient requirements of these plants. So I think we can get rid of D. So now we're in a position here where we have B and C that are left over, and we have to see if we can choose one of these before we can answer 26. Now, there's a lot of occasions where we have two answer choices that could work, and we can't decide between them. But let's look more closely and see if we can choose between one of these in advance. So again, remember that we're looking for the nutrient requirements of many plants, and we're looking for an inference between them. So when I look between answer choices here, B and C, C is the one that attracts my attention more. Because what C is saying is that because the plant, right, Monotropsis odorata, doesn't require photosynthetic pigmentation, meaning its coloration doesn't have to be used for photosynthesis, like the green color, to produce its own energy. What it can do is it can adopt a whole different range of colors, which tells us that this is sort of a special plant. And what that implies is that other plants that aren't special, or other plants that do require photosynthetic pigmentation, they're not able to adopt a broader range. They have a more narrow range of coloration that they can use. Whereas B here, all it does is really focus on this plant, Monotropsis odorata, and all it does is sort of focus on it and focuses on where it gets its nutrients. But I think answer choice C here sort of expands a little bit and gives us something to say about the nutrient requirements of other plants. So for that reason, I'm going to get rid of B, and I'm going to end up with answer choice C. So now what I'm going to do is use this to answer question 26. So one more time, what C basically says is that it's singling out this plant because it says it doesn't require photosynthetic pigmentation. And what it says is that that plant is free to adopt a broader range of possibilities in coloration. So this tells me that other plants have to adopt a more narrow range of possibilities in coloration. So we're looking for something about how many plants need a more narrow range. So A says exaggerating the plant's coloration patterns. So this is about the other plants' coloration patterns. However, the passage doesn't really say that it's going to be exaggerating, right? That if you have the photosynthetic pigmentation or a green color, that you're going to have exaggerated coloration patterns. All it means is that you're going to have a more narrow range of possible patterns. So I would get rid of A. B says that these other plants, it limits the plant's defensive options. And we got to make a couple connections here. And remember that we're talking about the camouflage of plants. So Monotropsis odorata is able to camouflage itself, probably because it's able to adopt a broader range of possibilities in coloration, which tells us that other plants that aren't able to do this, that do require photosynthetic pigmentation, they're probably not able to camouflage themselves, and therefore that's going to limit their plant's defensive options. So B is a good answer choice. C says that the nutrient requirements of the other plants increases the plant's energy consumption. But this maybe makes sense, but nothing in the passage really tells us that directly. We would need a sentence that basically says, because these other plants can use photosynthesis, they're able to consume more energy than the plant we're looking at, which only lives off of this fungus. But nothing in the passage about that, so we can get rid of C. Then D says that the other plants have the consequence, their coloration narrows the plant's potential habitats, which would mean they can only live in certain locations because of because of their nutrient requirements, because they have to use photosynthesis and they're a green color. But this is not really a good answer choice either, because nothing in the text talks about how it's going to limit their habitat. All it does is says that it limits their coloration possibilities. So I would get rid of D. And that's going to leave us with answer choice B, which is our correct answer for question number 26. And then we'll choose answer choice C as our correct answer for question 27.